right, welcome back everybody. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome to Notes to Fret, where we are all about turning theory into riffs. And in this video, we are going to look at the sounds of the Phrygian mode. So hopefully you've had a little bit of time to review the Phrygian mode. And what we're going to do in this video, obviously, is we're going to do a quick review on Phrygian. Then we're going to explore the sounds. And towards the end of the video, I'm going to give you really kind of some secrets or some of my thoughts on how to go about exploring modes all together, kind of as a total picture. Because obviously here, Phrygian, we're starting to close out our conversation on the modes of the major scale. There's a lot more modes and a lot of different scales. We'll talk more about that down the road, but Phrygian's kind of closing out our modes of the major scale. So later on in the video, I'll just kind of give you some of my thoughts on really understanding and unlocking how you can use these modes. But with that being said, right off the bat, here we're looking at our circle of fifths to the left, obviously, and to the right we have A Aeolian and A Phrygian. And those are the two modes that we're going to compare, right? Because we always want to compare minor to minor. I shouldn't say always, but quite often. So when we're looking at the circle of fifths, we see A minor, right? It's the relative minor of C major, whatever, no big deal. We've seen it all 1,000,001 times. No sharps, no flats, right? We've got A minor, a B diminished, a C major, a D minor, an E minor, an F major, a G major, right? This is just your typical A minor mode. And we start off with A Aeolian in the scale. We start off with the whole step and a half step, right? That's okay, no worries. When we look at A Phrygian, or really just Phrygian in general, by way of comparing Phrygian to Aeolian, Phrygian just starts with a half step and a whole step. That's pretty much the only difference, right? And so starting off with that half step and that whole step, all that's really going to give us is in the scale, the only note that is different in the scales, the only note is the difference between B and B flat, right? That's the difference between A minor and A Phrygian. However, what we need to pay attention to make certain that we're using our scales properly are the actual qualities of the chord, right? So our second became a major as opposed to a diminished, right? So we have B flat major as opposed to B diminished. And then our fifth becomes an E diminished in Phrygian as opposed to an E minor in Aeolian. And then our seventh becomes a minor as opposed to a major in A Aeolian, right? So A minor has a G major as the seventh, A Phrygian has a G minor as the seventh, right? So the chord qualities really are what we need to start paying attention to when we're looking at how do we really explore these modes quite a bit more, right? The modes within the scale are going to have notes here and there, but really understanding the quality of our chords is what's going to, really give our ear the ability to hear that modal sound. So we know that the B flat is the note that is different, right? And so we want to make certain that on our fretboard, we understand where all the B flats are, right? Because we're pretty much, if we're going to use A Phrygian as opposed to A minor, we're going to want to hit we're going to want to hit B flat wherever we can in the place of B, right? That's how we're going to pull in Phrygian. So this individual note, we just need to understand what it does to the difference between the chord qualities. And again, here's the differences, right? We've got B diminished, E minor, and G major in A Aeolian or A minor. But in A Phrygian, we have B flat major, E diminished, and G minor, right? All of this simply because we're replacing more or less B with B flat, right? And so that affects our second position in the scale. It affects our fifth, and it also changes our seventh, right? So, these are the three prominent factors if we want to look at how do I make a piece of music transition from A minor to A Phrygian, which is still a minor scale. So there's only mild differences, right? We just have to look at the second, the fifth, and the seventh. And so what we're going to do now is we're actually going to jump in and listen to some of the sounds of the Phrygian mode. So with that, let's go ahead and start off with a 1-2-1. All right, so really quick, we're going to start off with a real simple chord progression, a 1-2-1, just to get our ear kind of familiar with the Phrygian sound. And again, this is going to be A, B flat major, back to A. So let's take a quick listen. And one more time. Okay, so we heard that, right? We definitely heard that darker sound. Let's go ahead and expand on that a little bit further with another chord progression in Phrygian. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to expand on that a little bit and bring in our seventh, which in this case is G minor. And that, again, is something unique that distinguishes A minor from A Phrygian. So we want to be able to leverage that as often as we can to make certain that our listener is really sticking to that Phrygian mode, right? Their ear is expecting Phrygian, and that's what we give them. So here, I'm going to do the 1-2-7-1. So let's listen to that. And one more time, again, the 1-2-7-1. Now you'll notice the resolution from the seventh, right? And what pulled us away was our second. Still pretty dark. Okay, so we're starting to expand some of our, listening on that Phrygian understanding quite a bit more. And we're going to listen to nuance difference here in the next video for understanding how that resolution might sound a little bit different with some minor variations. So let's go ahead and listen to that. Okay, so what I want to do now is I'm going to reverse the second and the seventh. And what we're going to do is the 1-7-2-1. So we're going to be getting that resolution back to our tonic. It's going to sound a little bit different. So let's go ahead and again, this is going to be the 1-7-2-1. Kind of messed that up for a minute. So let's listen to that again. Again, 1-7-2-1. And you'll notice that resolution versus what we did earlier. Okay, so hopefully you heard a little bit in there, but now let's take a look and listen to the comparison between these two for a moment. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to play that one right after the other. I'm going to do the 1-2-7-1 and pay attention to that resolution. And then I'm going to reverse the 7 in the second, and you'll get that different resolution. So let's listen to those together. Well, one right after the other. Again, I'm going to do the 1-2-7-1 first, followed by the 1-7-2-1. So let's listen. One more time. And now I'm going to do the 1-7-2-1. Again, the 1-7-2-1. And so you can hear that resolution a little bit different, okay? Okay, so hopefully you got an understanding for that resolution coming back to our tonic from a couple of variations. And what we're going to do now is really pay attention to kind of a hyper minor feel, like everything minor within Phrygian. So let's go ahead and take a listen and see how that kind of works out for us. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to really harp on as much of the minor component as Phrygian as we pretty much can. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a 1 4 5 1. Right, that's the 1 4 5 1. That's the most prominent chord progression ever. So, but we're going to listen to it in the context of Phrygian because we're going to have that E diminished in there, right? As opposed to the E minor. That's really going to help our Phrygian sound out. And we're using nothing but minor chords, right? Because we got that D minor. So let's go ahead and listen to the 1 4 5 back to 1. I'm going to slow that down a little bit for everybody. One more time. All right, that was a lot of minor in there. That's a lot of darkness. So you should definitely get that 1 4 5 feel, and Phrygian has a little bit of darkness to it. Okay, so we definitely heard some minor darkness in there. And what we're going to do now is flip the script and actually pay attention to almost everything exclusively major. So let's go ahead and take a listen to that now. Okay, so what we're going to do now is kind of reverse that and do a whole lot of major with it. So what I'm going to do now is the whole chord progressions, except for our tonic, everything else is going to be major. So I'm going to do a 1 2 3 6, which is our F, back to 1. So let's go ahead and listen to as much major as we can practically make our Phrygian sound with the 1 2 3 6 1. Let's listen to that again. That's about as major as you can have Phrygian sound. So just to kind of drive that one home again, these are the majors that we're using, right? We got our tonic, which is A minor. Then we come into our B flat major. Then we come into our C major. Then we come into our F major, and then back to our A minor. So one more time, let's listen to a whole lot of major of Phrygian. Even with that much major, Phrygian kind of brings us back down into that darkness just a little bit. Okay, so hopefully you heard the difference between that minor and major feel in the Phrygian. And what we're going to kind of finish off with is listening to kind of a combination of, really integrating that minor along with a little bit of major into that Phrygian, entirety of the mode to really get a kind of a well-rounded understanding of what Phrygian ultimately sounds like for us. So let's go ahead and take a listen to that. What I want to talk about now is kind of combining that whole sound of major and minor kind of combined together. So what I'm going to do is a 1 5 7 2 back to 1. And what this chord progression is doing with the 1, then we hit the 5, which is our diminished dominant, right? In this case, an E diminished. Then to a 7, which is a minor, right? In this case, G minor. And it comes back to our second, which is a major, in this case, B flat major, right? So we've got pulling away, minor, minor, minor. Then we hit a major, and then we come back home. So let's listen to this. It's a pretty unique sound. That you can get from Phrygian. I personally like this chord progression when it comes to Phrygian. So let's just check it out really quick. Again, the 1, 5, 7, 2, 1. Let's listen to that one more time. I just like that. But one more time, just to kind of drive the point home, mixing in that minor, that minor progression away, major, back to our tonic. I just think this one sounds great, but you tell me down in the comments if you like it. Very Phrygian-esque, if that's a word. Okay, so hopefully at this point you have a pretty good understanding of what the Phrygian mode is really going to ultimately give you for your musical sound, right? And it doesn't matter if you put, a bunch of reverb or a bunch of distortion or heavy metal pedals or EQ, it doesn't matter. You're still going to wind up with this type of sound if you're putting a piece of music together with Phrygian. And in order to make certain that you stick to that Phrygian mode, what we're going to do now is jump in and actually understand how to really evaluate your musical piece to make certain that you are maintaining that Phrygian sound. So here, as we're again looking at A Aeolian at the top and A Phrygian down at the bottom, if we pay attention to our circle of fifths, right, we've got the A minor highlighted, right? We've seen this 1,000,001 times before. But if we come over to the left, counterclockwise, to D minor, we can start to understand some of the competition or some of the challenges that we may run into when trying to make certain that we keep our listener's ear in A Phrygian rather than losing them to a different mode or a different key. Now, as we're looking at this, right off the bat, we can kind of say, okay, well, A minor to D minor is probably my biggest concern when making certain that I don't lose the A Phrygian sound. And we'll talk more about that here in a moment. Looking at this, you may wonder, okay, well, why did, how did you automatically go to the left? Like, it's a little bit of experience on it. That's one thing. But what I'm going to truly show you here is understanding why. If I look down at the Phrygian mode, right off the bat, I can see that I have a B flat major. So I need to understand where on the circle of fifths is there a B flat major? Well, if I come over to D minor, the key of D minor has a B flat major in it. So that's automatically starting to lead me over in that direction. Furthermore, I can say, okay, now I've got a G minor as well. Well, if I look at that G minor, now I'm seeing a B flat major as well as a G minor, right? So again, that really leads me into that D minor key or the F major key, regardless. But since we're looking at A minor, we're going to kind of stick, comparing minor to minors. And so that's how I evaluate the circle of fifths to go, okay, let me pay attention to D minor, because something that, that could be a risk. I could lose my listener between A Phrygian and D minor very quickly, and I'm evaluating that because I see this B flat major and this G minor in there. And so that's how I know to come over to the left or counterclockwise, right? Now, putting that aside, all of a sudden I'm saying, okay, well, am I in the key of D minor? To some extent, a little bit, yes. But we're trying to maintain a mode rather than transition a key, right? So we're trying to say, I want to stay in A Phrygian, and I don't want to go to D minor. So there's a risk there. And again, that's what I was looking at, right? I looked at the D major, the G minor, and I'm kind of saying, okay, what are the differences between these two? What's the difference when I move over into D minor? Well, again, B flat major, E diminished, G minor. So right off the bat, I know I got to be careful. With that being understood, the next thing that I really need to kind of fundamentally understand if I want to keep the listener in A minor, right? Because still A Phrygian is still in minor mode. That means I need to make certain that I keep coming back to that A minor. That's priority number one. Always come back to A minor. And I want to still incorporate B flat major, G minor, and E diminished. But my goal, no matter what, is still to come back to that A minor. That's priority number one. And so now what I need to really consider is the fundamental bass between A minor and A Phrygian, or A Phrygian and D minor. What are my solid known go-to points? Well, F major, that doesn't change. D minor, that doesn't change. C major, that doesn't change. A minor, that doesn't change either. Right? So this is my basis. This is my fundamental. These four chords, regardless if I'm in A minor or D minor or A Phrygian, they don't change. There's no change. So I know for a fact that these are my basis. Now that has a good side and a bad side. The good side is I know my basis. The bad side is if I hang out on these four chords, the listener's going to have no idea if they're in A minor, D minor, C major, or F major. They're going to have no clue because it's all going to sound just fine. There's nothing unique here, right? There's no dissonance. There's no pulling away. There's no coming home. There's just kind of a blank, right? So knowing this is important, but understanding that I can't just hover on these four and expect my listener to hear A Phrygian, that's just not going to happen. So what I need to do here is understand my outliers, right? These kind of gray areas. And we can see on the counterclockwise, we have the B flat major and the G minor. That is definitely A Phrygian. And then I have the G major and the E minor on the clockwise direction, and that's definitely A minor, right? And so when we talk about writing a piece of music that is in A minor, but there are certain bars or certain sections that are A Phrygian, this is kind of the back and forth, right? It's hey, I've got this mode and I start playing in this gray area. And it's a lot of really what modes are. When people get confused about modes, oftentimes using them and executing them in a piece of music, it's understanding that there's a lot of this gray area kind of play around. So I may have a chorus 100% dedicated in A minor. That's fine. And, that's a whole lot of G major and E minor, and I may even throw in B diminished. And then I may have a bridge that's in A Phrygian. Well, B diminished would be out the window, and I'd be pulling in B flat major and G minor as opposed to the G major, right? Maybe even the E diminished over the E minor. I have to understand these gray areas because that's what I can use to leverage the modes, right? That this is where modes really kind of come in, is they get these kind of outlier edge cases that are in these kind of nice little interesting gray areas. So again, that G major, E minor, B flat major, G minor sort of thing, and you'll have to grow into how you're ultimately going to use these gray areas as well as the diminished chords, right? You've got your fundamental bass, and then you've got these diminished chords, and then you've got these outliers, all 100% valid. But just as you grow as a musician, you're going to kind of have to come into your own understanding when to use these gray areas and how you choose to incorporate some of these diminished chords, right? Diminished chords, again, be very careful. Don't think they're not the secret to music. There's nothing magical about them. They're kind of annoying, but they're cool to bring in, once every, 1200 bars or something, right? They can play a piece, but they're not like your magical unlock things. But you can use them, and they're very effective. So it's one of those things that I just wanted to kind of point out. This is where modes really start to play into the whole aspect of things. And that brings me into what I want to talk about to kind of finish off our conversations on the modes for the major scale. With Phrygian mode, just as we've spoken about in previous modes, we always want to make certain that we avoid bringing our listener into an associated mode, right? In this case, we'd want to avoid bringing our listener from A Phrygian into D minor, right? We've got to be careful of that. And how do we do that? We spoke about it, right? You bring them back to that A minor and you use your chord progressions a little bit differently, right? That's really the secret to modes. It's how you do your chord progressions, right? So how do you do that? You always come back to your desired tonic. In this case, A minor. That's the tonic. You're in A Phrygian, which is a minor mode. If you were in A Dorian, that's a minor mode. You keep coming back to that A. If you were in A Lydian, you'd come back to A major. If you were in A Mixolydian, you'd come back to that A major. And Locrian, you come back to A diminished, but that's just whatever. This is what you really need to pay attention to with your modes and really understand those gray areas. And what I want to do in kind of closing out our conversation with modes of the major scale. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of other scales, so there's a lot of other modes. We're going to progress into discussions on chords and more advanced chords and other chord progressions, and we're gonna stick with this before I start introducing some of the other scales. So when I'm still talking about discovering modes, for the time being, we're talking about modes of the major scale, so we can all kind of stay on point. I'll get into the other scales quite a bit down the road, but I want to cover chords next in the next series of videos. So kind of closing out the understanding of modes is one of the things that I think a lot of musicians struggle with, and I know many guitarists, myself included, hyper struggle with, is with having tablature as such an easy kind of pick up a piece of music and play it right off the bat. It's all we had to ever do if we were going to play a piece of music. Let's say a piece by Yngwie, right? And we're looking at a piece by Yngwie, a lot of fast, incredible licks going on. Well, if we look at the tab, we can start to pick that up. It might take us 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, who knows? But it's kind of a copy and paste, right? I can look at a piece from Yngwie in tablature, and ultimately I'll start to be able to play that. If I put in enough dedication to it, I'll start to be able to play that. But it's a direct copy of Yngwie, right? So copying music from a guitarist's perspective, playing someone else's music, which I am not knocking. If that's your jam, because it's fun as all get out, and I still do it to this day. I love playing other people's music because it's fun. And so this is not a knock on you. If this is what you want to do, I highly encourage you. I want you to do it. I want you to put out some awesome covers on YouTube and just be incredible, right? It's actually really cool. If this is what you want to do, you've got like my 2 thumbs up. Now, but what I do want to say is learning someone else's music via tab is a technical endeavor. We're looking at, whether it's alternate picking or sweep picking or speed, whatever it may be. It's a very technical endeavor, but it's still, you've got one piece of reference. You've got the tab. And so all you need to do is look at the tab, get the technical, move on. And then that, again, I fully acknowledge that could take, months to years. I'm not taking anything away from that, but it's just it's a more direct technical approach. Okay. Now, why am I bringing that up? Because when it comes to creating your own music, it is very much a multi-dimensional aspect to your musical journey. So with that, your musical creation, if you're doing something that is you, it's a journey. There is no one right way to do it. There is no single source of this is how it's done. And I know as a guitarist, and I'm speaking from experience, when I first started off, I would copy someone's music. I'd have one, piece of tab. I'd play the song. It was awesome. And then when it came into creating my own music, I wanted that one source, and that led me to my own songs. But that's just not the way it works. The creation of it is understanding and playing, right? So when we talk about the gray areas of modes, you just have to get in there and explore. There's only, regardless my videos, books, nobody, myself included, nobody can give you that definitive answer. You just have to take kind of the high level information and create on your own from there. It's the building blocks and saying build, right? If you look at somebody with Legos, right? I've seen people make submarines out of Legos. And then, some people make houses and, whatever, it doesn't matter. Legos are the building blocks. Once you understand them, your creativity comes along. So that's kind of where your discovery with modes is going to come into play. It is going to be difficult. It's not just that one reference equals new songs. So with that, your musical creation obviously is an application of your knowledge. The more knowledge you have of music theory, first off, the more understanding you have, the more you have an understanding of where and how to break the rules, which is going to give you a tremendous advantage. So, go in, understand this stuff, and start to apply it to pieces of music, because this, I think, I know for me, this final bullet point was, the biggest hindrance for anything I had in my musical journey when I started with modes and everything else. Once I started writing my own music, that was an exposure to say, hey, it's not to say, Jeff, you are or are not a good guitar player. It's saying, Jeff, I do or do not like what you created. It's very revealing, and it puts you in a vulnerable position. So I think a lot of times that this final bullet point really is that point where you just have to say, you know what, I'm going to explore, I'm going to try something with modes, and it's probably going to sound horrible at first. It's going to sound weird, and I'm not going to understand it. But if you do it 5 times, then after 5 times, you're going to get it. It will just start to click. One of the things you may want to try is writing a piece of music in A minor, then converting it to A Phrygian, then converting it to A Dorian, then converting it over to A major, and then A Lydian and A Mixolydian. Just to give it a shot. To start to explore. You'll start to hear your own music kind of come to life. So that's really my 2 cents on how to discover how to use modes and start writing and creating your own music. So with that being said, as always, anyone who's stuck around this long, huge appreciation. If you're getting something out of these videos, again, thumbs up. Really can't even thank you enough. And if you're watching these pretty consistently, I don't charge anything. YouTube doesn't charge anything. Subscribe. Huge, right? Really helps the channel out with that. So with that being said, we will dive into the next progression of videos where we will be talking about a lot of chords. We will really be talking about diving into extended chords, different sus chords, any number of chords. We'll move into ninths, some 11ths. And really, that's really what the next series of videos are going to be about. So with that being said, again, thank you so much, everybody, for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Take care, everybody.